that's where users are. We already mentioned it. Users today, they're in Outlook and they're in Teams. So if we integrate with Teams, all of a sudden we have access to those users where they are, and that's a really big benefit.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
So with that, I want to change and pivot a little bit, and I want to talk about a real challenge around collaboration today. Almost all my examples have been in very Microsoft-centric organizations. You're Microsoft-centric, so these collaborative experiences are naturally going to be integrated. They're naturally going to be easier to do. What happens is, as we look ahead, we find that a lot of times organizations have multiple clouds. And while there's a goal to consolidate almost always to Microsoft, right? Microsoft 365 is still the hub of your digital workplace. It's your goal to consolidate to that, and Microsoft Teams being at the center of a lot of that. The reality is it takes time to get there. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. The first comment that I would have is that we know that some customers have Zoom or Slack, maybe through an acquisition or because there was a short-term need, and some of those are going to be displaced, right? Those are redundant investments. Sometime, hopefully, Slack gets replaced by Teams. Hopefully, Zoom gets replaced by Teams as well. In that example, the reason sometimes this is harder to do is situational, but I'll use an example of Slack. One of the reasons it can be hard to migrate is because Slack has an app ecosystem, and it's not the base collaboration experience that you're replicating with Teams, and then you would just transition the content over. It's that you have to recreate that whole application collaboration experience ecosystem with Slack, and that's what makes Slack more sticky or challenging to migrate. Now, you still migrate it. We do lots of Slack migrations, but the point is that's why Slack is still, while it's shrinking in market share, it's going to take a while to go away. At the same time, with mergers and acquisitions, sometimes you inherit these kinds of tools, so it takes cycles to get there. So what you want is your collaboration experience to be integrated with these things whenever possible so that it's more seamless, so it's easier. But when possible, we will consolidate. So speaking of that, how do we potentially make that experience better? Well, the good news here is that today, there's 700 plus apps and counting in Microsoft Teams. So you have a massive ecosystem that's pre-integrated into Teams. And this is a really robust ecosystem. Slack that I mentioned is integrated into Teams. Like these vendors that are direct competitors there's still entry points and ways in which you can use Teams with Slack. So it's important to understand that when we think of our employee collaboration experience, even if you're not Microsoft centric, your goal is to create a cohesive and consistent employee experience around collaboration. And that's made possible with things like Microsoft Teams, which obviously I've talked about a lot today because of these integration points. Now, I'm going to highlight a very important distinction. Microsoft also announced last year, and this is a big change, that vendors like ServiceNow and other companies can use Microsoft Teams, the whole platform, right? The messaging, all that stuff, the meetings, clients, etc., inside of their own apps. Now, while this may just seem like, oh, okay, that's nice. So if I'm in ServiceNow, I'll be able to have, like, ServiceNow doesn't have to build their own chat engine. They can use Teams. They don't have to build a meeting engine. They can use, the Teams kind of video stuff, et cetera, from that. That is true, right? They get all that benefit, but it's actually more important than that. And I would really suggest watching for build announcements and other things later this year, because I think what you're going to see, and this is my prediction, is that Microsoft will double down on that, where more of the entire platform of Teams is made available if you've integrated, the chat or the meetings or these other capabilities into your platform, your other app. And why this is important is because today Teams is the gravity well. All these 700 plus vendors want to integrate with Teams because that's where users are. We already mentioned it. Users today, they're in Outlook and they're in Teams. So if we integrate with Teams, all of a sudden we have access to those users where they are, and that's a really big benefit. However, if you have an experience, you want people to go to it sometimes. It's not like you don't want them to go to your SaaS application. You definitely want that. So when you're encouraging people to go there, what if you don't lose any of that collaboration fidelity, all of that collaboration integration, as well as the integration alongside of 700 plus apps and counting, that could be enabled just by integrating Teams. And that's where I think Teams is going to really continue to be, the cornerstone of collaboration in the ecosystem, not because of where it is today and because others are integrating into it, but because it will be integrated in other places. And when it is, it's not just Teams, but Loop and all sorts of other core capabilities that Teams empowers that will be auto-integrated in those places as well. So you don't lose that fidelity and more importantly, that integration and connectiveness to the other knowledge and content and other things that matter to you. Topics would work in those spaces, right? In those third-party tools in the same way it would work in core Teams. So that's the direction in future and why Teams has such a strong capability of being kind of like how Microsoft won the identity challenge in the cloud. They're the, AD on-prem, and Azure AD online is the identity 100% world leader. They would be the leader here in collaboration as well and maintain it because of that.